22-year-old Brad Perry works at the local gas station in the close-knit community of Brigham City, Utah. To earn a little extra money for college and his upcoming wedding, Brad decides to work the night shift. But by dawn, he'll be brutally murdered. And the small Mormon community where he lives will never be the same again.
On Memorial Day weekend, 1984, two students, Sabah and Barish, studied all night for a final test. They wanted to put the books aside and go for a drive and have some breakfast. That was one trip that they will never forget. Approximately 3:50 to 4 a.m., the two students arrived at a gas station. They pulled up to a self-service pump.
Someone came out to serve them, which they thought was unusual. They were explicitly told not to go into the store and asked what they wanted. The student who was driving specifically asked for $5 in fuel and gave this attendant 5 $1 bills. The other student wanted cigarettes and gave him, I believe, a $5 bill. The attendant returned to the store to retrieve the cigarettes, came back out. The cigarettes came to $1 exactly, which was also odd. And 4 $1 bills were returned to the student. And all of a sudden, they noticed wet blood transferring from this person's hands. They noticed that he had blood on his fingers and also on his shoes. Immediately, they, in their words, decided they better get the hell out of there. They stopped about 5 or 6 miles down the road at the next phone booth.
Within 5 minutes, 2 officers arrived. The officers noticed that there was blood on the tile that led to the back room. A person was laying in a pool of blood, bound with a wire behind his back. He was deceased.
The victim had been stabbed with a foot-long screwdriver that penetrated through his upper chest. There was a large cast iron bell, appeared to be hit in the side of the head with that and had a skull fracture from that. The coup de grace was a large soda canister, would weigh probably in the neighborhood of 40 pounds, that was used to crush his skull.
A wallet in his back pocket had a driver's license ID. It was quite traumatic for the officers because both officers had known the victim personally. In fact, everyone in Brigham City knew Brad Perry.
Brigham City was a small, bucolic, almost sort of a Mormon Mayberry kind of a place. Many people were related. Everybody knew everybody.
The victim and his family, they're well known for being good people. Brad had everything going for him. He was engaged to be married. He worked full-time, went to school. So there was a heartfelt concern for the family.
Back in 1984, my mom and my little brother and myself all left on a trip to go to California and go to SeaWorld. Brad stayed behind. He would take extra shifts at the gas station. And this time he took a graveyard shift to work overnight because he was trying to save money for college and to get married.
When we left SeaWorld, a friend of my husband came and said he had heard we were down there and he was in Southern California, so he thought he'd give me a ride back to the motel.
We obviously didn't have cell phones back then. My dad knew we had to be notified. He said, well, I've got a friend that is a fireman down there and he could do it. We go back to the hotel and he took my mom into another room and told her that her son was dead.
And I said, well, what happened to him? He said, well, somebody killed him. It's like that. And I just lost it.
We started to drive toward Utah. And then I remember us on the freeway in California getting a flat tire. The worst part for me was to see my mom get out and get physically ill. I was the oldest son at that point with my brother gone. And I just was like, as a man, I was like, I gotta protect my mom. But there was nothing I could do for her. I could just see she was physically ill and I was thinking, wow, this is, I just couldn't even hardly fathom what I was seeing.
The two students from the gas station, Sabah and Barish, they were brought in for questioning. They had a police sketch artist who attempted to sketch the attendant that they saw come out and serve them as they were there at the gas station. Sabah became frustrated with the sketch artist's inability to capture what he believed he saw. He's quite a good artist, and he actually sketched 2 sketches.
They were very consistent with their description of the suspect's eyes. And they talked about the emptiness looking into those eyes and how dark they were. The officers tried to get all the information on the victim and his duties at the station. They determined that it is highly possible that someone that works at the station was involved in this crime.
For example, when Barish and Sabah pull up to the gas pumps have to be reset from inside the gas station. Somebody would have to know how to do that.
And then you have the fact the floor safe was opened up. Brad had no access to that. The only person that had a key to that floor safe was the assistant manager, Thomas Nager. Thomas Nager, that was supposed to show up for work at 6 a.m., didn't show up. The police had the crime scene secure. They had the owner of the station there. Then they noticed that Thomas Nager is in the background of all the people behind the tape.
He was expected to report to work at 6 o'clock on the morning of May the 25th, and he did not.
He didn't just come forward, which kind of brought red flags. The police described his demeanor as being nervous, kind of scared. They also noticed that the composite that the witnesses drew resembled Thomas Nager. Police asked Thomas, how come you didn't show up for work? He eventually said that he did oversleep, that he was at home. Brad was supposed to call him and wake him up. That didn't happen. That's why he didn't show up. In the 1980s, fingerprint evidence was where DNA is today. The technicians that dusted for the prints told us that they could tell a fingerprint just like they recognize a face.
They brought in one of the internationally recognized fingerprint experts from West Valley City in Salt Lake, who diligently worked trying to make some sense out of the fingerprints. They had the insight to use a forensic vacuum to vacuum the fight area. And it's from that vacuuming that we were able to locate some hairs. There were hundreds of prints that were compared, and yet Tom Nager's fingerprints weren't found.
Thomas Nager's prints should be at the station. He worked there for years. They should be all over that place.
We had to release him, but Nager was still considered a person of interest.
It was evening when I finally pulled in my driveway, and my friends were standing there. That was hard. That was the hardest part, because then I was like, this is real.
When we got home, of course, everyone wanted the story. There were already newsmen here at the house. Yeah.
My parents have been best friends with the Perrys for as long as I can remember. My father was very much involved with helping the Perrys deal with the media. The reporters would camp out on the lawn. They were like vultures. And my father would go and tell them they needed to give them space.
Later on that evening, officers traveling on Highway 89 noticed a male walking southbound who'd matched the description of the suspect that the students provided. When the officers stopped Mr. Ellsworth, they noticed blood, not only on his shirt, but on his hands. Their thought was, we've got the suspect. They bring in the students who witnessed the person come out and pump the gas. Neither student said that Mr. Ellsworth was the person that came out and pumped the gas. It's disappointing. A lot of people thought they had the suspect.
There aren't enough links in that chain to make it link up.
We just wanted something to go forward. You keep praying something's going to happen, and it doesn't.
The Perrys, after burying their son, needed to get away.
It helped when we went to Montana because we got away from the scene.
The idea was to get our minds off of what had happened, hopefully, and get something more positive in our minds at that point.
But when they came back, they noticed that their home had been vandalized and burglarized.
Whoever did it broke into our house, vandalized it, stole some stuff, and even went so far as to defecate in Brad's bedroom. Why would somebody do something like that?
I have to admit that I am the one that said, why don't you look next door? I thought Craig Martinez was involved.
Craig Martinez lived in the same neighborhood as the Perrys and was certainly not a model citizen by anyone's stretch of the imagination.
Craig Martinez did have criminal history. People that were around Craig did not want to set him off because they knew how violent he could become. The police searched Craig Martinez's bedroom. They found items from that burglary under his mattress. The crime looked highly personal. Police had some witnesses come forward who said that Craig Martinez came up to a party up above Brigham City the night of the murder with blood on his clothing. In looking at Craig Martinez and the burglary at the Perry's house, the police found out that Craig Martinez was friends with Thomas Nager. In doing several interviews, detectives determined that Thomas Nager was dealing drugs at the gas station. In the mid-'80s, in that community, there was a lot of drug activity.
I always thought the kids went to Salt Lake or the big city in Ogden or somewhere further south, and they got their drugs there. To know that they were selling it out of this convenience store, that people knew that's where to go buy it, that was a little bit more of a shock than I expected.
At the gas station, Craig Martinez was somehow involved with Nager as a purchaser or otherwise involved with Nager's drug distribution scheme. Did Brad Perry somehow become aware of the fact that Tom Nager was dealing drugs out of the store?
Brad was a good kid. If somebody's breaking the law, Brad would have said something or even called the police.
The theory came up that Brad knew something was going on and they killed him for it.
Brad Perry was 6'1", and he had great strength. It would have taken two people, Craig Martinez and Thomas Nager, to do what they did to him. Craig Martinez, his nickname sums it up. They called him Monster. It's because he would lose it over nothing. We get the warrant on Craig Martinez to collect his fingerprints and to compare it with the evidence that we have.
But again, we couldn't make the link between the fingerprint evidence that could be found and a suspect at that point. There was not enough evidence to charge either Martinez or Nager with something related to Brad Perry's homicide. It was terribly frustrating. Everything was combed and recombed and combed again. We needed, at the very least, a witness or some evidence that would vector to a particular person. But the case was just largely at a dead end. It was a cold case.
For Brad's family, the pain of the loss remains fresh. They try to restore purpose to their lives without the person who held them together.
Now we're talking 2.5, 3 years after the murder. Nothing's really been done.
We didn't think they'd probably ever solve it. We thought we were through. And that's not fair. You miss Brad, whether it's cold, hot, or whatever it is, because he just was such a good person.
I was angry and frustrated. I just kind of backed away and started to separate myself from my parents, my family.
Lee decided to alter his driver's license to get beer, which the LDS Church does not allow.
I was struggling, not only that he'd been killed, but he was a good guy, and I was thinking, why would God let him die? And it was about that time when I discovered Brad's journals. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we are encouraged to keep track of our history. Brad liked to write in his journal what he was thinking, what he was feeling. After high school, Brad was serving an LDS mission. On his mission, he was riding his bike, and he had a terrible, terrible accident. He was in a major trauma unit down in Louisiana. He had severe facial injuries. The message I got from his journal was, these things are not God's fault. They happen sometimes. These kind of things become challenges for us, and God will bless us to overcome them. And that's where the journal brought me back from a negative direction of being mad.
Sheriff Jensen came to me and said, I know you're new in detectives, but I want to give you the Perry case. And I about fell over in my chair. I'm a spiritual person. The first thing I wanted to do is meditate with the Lord. I was in my office one day and I received an answer in my heart that this was going to be solved. I started to review the case, the photographs, fingerprints, and so on. I watched the crime scene video maybe 100 times, trying to see something that possibly we missed. We had this hair found at the scene that was been sealed and collected. What I realized was it had never been analyzed. We needed to compare the hair at the scene to the main suspects, Craig Martinez and Thomas Nager. We picked Thomas Nager up on the way to the station. He became irritated and blurted out that, why do you have me? You know Craig Martinez killed Brad Perry. Thomas Nager prompted me to get the warrant on Craig Martinez to collect his hair and to compare it with the hair found at the scene that was been sealed and collected.
I get a phone call one day, a friend of mine who worked in the police department, and they say, hey, did you hear they have a suspect in your brother's murder case? That's the first time I knew they'd opened the case up. And I was like, really?
They weren't giving us a lot of hope. And then all of a sudden we hear that they were going to the state prison where Craig Martinez was.
And that's when we realized they were going after the hair on Martinez. They wouldn't be looking to match the hair if they didn't think he was a viable suspect at that point. And I'm thinking, this case may actually get solved.
At the time, Craig Martinez was an inmate at the state prison.
The SWAT team has to bring Martinez down because of his violent history. So they bring him to me, and he is shaved completely. He turns to me and he says, I guess you won't be getting my hairs.
Why would you shave yourself from head to foot if you had nothing to do with this crime?
I mean, it's not like he's on the state penitentiary swim team. From a common sense perspective, who does that absent an intent to obstruct justice?
The nurse actually said, I'll find a couple. We found them. And she found two on his nipple.
Getting the hair evidence was to facilitate a hair fiber comparison.
If that hair sample, if they can find hair on him and match those two, we might actually find out who did this. They do the hair, it doesn't match.
Now, does that logically prove Craig Martinez wasn't present? Absolutely not. It simply proves he didn't contribute that particular hair.
We're like, okay, great, now what?
At that time, I didn't feel anything but discouragement. So I said many prayers on behalf of the Perry family, and I put their name in a prayer box at the temple.
Thank heavens, that's where Amy came in.
I wanted to try to do as much as I could for this case and for the Perrys to give them some peace. Brad would babysit for my parents when they would go and play cards with Claudia and Newell. He used to like to be the monster underneath the blanket. He'd put a big blanket over the top of him, and if you came anywhere near the blanket, he'd grab you and tickle you in, and he was just wonderful.
She had gone through law school and was a lawyer.
Approximately 18 years after Brad's death, I ran for county attorney. I just knew that it would go cold if I didn't do something. I sat down with Scott Cosgrove. I asked him, have we tested all the evidence that we have for DNA? And he told me no.
At that point in time, DNA testing was in its very beginning stages in the state of Utah, and they were pretty parsimonious with their willingness to test things. We had to go to our county commission to get some additional funding, and Amy facilitated those additional funds. The results from the DNA testing are reported to us. All of the DNA-related evidence was Brad Perry's blood.
It was incredibly discouraging for me, frankly. We didn't really have anything to be able to move forward on a trial.
And that's when I remember there's one last thing to be rechecked. The blood on the dollar bill.
All these years, the dollar bill had been stored at the state crime lab, preserved in their freezers.
The state crime lab tried to convince me that the blood on the dollar bill was the victim's. And I said, well, okay, if it is, it is. But this piece, we know that the suspect handled. And it's been in your custody ever since. A month or two went by, and that's when I received the call.
Scott tells me that we had a hit, but the name he gave was somebody we had never even heard of.
Who the hell is Glenn Griffin? We have a DNA hit on the bloody dollar bill, and it belongs to Glenn Griffin. So I immediately did all the research on who is this guy.
Mr. Griffin, at the time, was in federal custody in Lompoc, California, serving time for operating a clandestine meth lab. He'd been in and out of jail and prison for almost all of his adult life. We immediately get a hold of Griffin's probation records so we can start to build a sense of who his friends are, who his family are. That's how we located his mother.
I'm driving over the hill to Hiram, not far from Brigham City. That's where Glenn's parents live. I meet with them, and I just asked them to tell me about Glenn. The mother said that they had problems with him. As he grew up, he was acting out, stealing money out of the till at the store, harming animals. And I asked for photos of him in 1984 to compare it with a suspect's sketch. It was an exact match. However, I was convinced that Glenn didn't do this alone. And I asked who he associated with, and she said that he was always with his buddy Wade Mond. They got into criminal activity and drugs together. She explained Glenn was the leader. He often threatened Wade or made fun of Wade, so Wade was kind of a follower. Wade was the weak link, and if anybody would give me good information, it would be Wade.
Just after Brad's death, Wade moves to Spokane, Washington, and doesn't come back.
Based on that information, I traveled to Spokane. Spokane police said that Wade was a witness in another investigation. So I said, can we use that to get Wade to your police department where we could interview him? And they said, sure. Okay, so we got your permission to record this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And that's when we said, Wade, this is not about that incident that occurred here in Spokane. This is about the murder of Brad Perry in 1984. This is the crime we're talking about.
Oh my God.
Wade, I can't express this enough. You've got to be open and honest with us. So what happened when you got him in the back room? At first, Wade didn't want to talk.
Look at this kid. He's 22 years old. He had a fiance. He had his whole life in front of him. And somebody snuffed it out.
But then we got into the conversation. I says, Wade, Glenn is being released from federal prison. And you could see the blood just drain from his face.
And so,
now I'm starting to think about that night, that early in the morning. You know, I do remember this.
Wade was at the station with Glenn, and they got in an argument with Brad over beer.
The dispute arose over change that Mr. Griffin was supposedly entitled to.
Brad told them to leave the station immediately. So Glenn became irritated and confronted Brad. They got in an argument. Glenn went berserk.
It became violent. It escalated into a physical altercation in the front of the store. As that's occurring, the students show up out front. Glenn goes out.
At that point, Brad was still alive.
Glenn comes back inside the gas station. Brad is taken in the back.
Glenn tortured him, and then he killed Brad Perry. And I says, Wade, I understand a lot of that as being truthful. However, there's no way Glenn did this on his own. And he said this, and I'll never forget it.
That was on the guy's leg.
Just holding him, holding my legs.
Holding him down.
All I did was help tie him up and keep him down. He said, once Glenn goes off, I can't stop it.
Were you scared of Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay?
Real scared.
The county attorney said that Glenn will be on a bus Monday because he's being released.
There was a short clock. We were under a stopwatch because if he's released, we knew that he would disappear and we would never be able to find him. We knew that Mr. Griffin was due to be released from federal custody in the next several days. And so Cosgrove immediately went down to interview Mr. Griffin.
When I first meet Mr. Griffin, I immediately see those dark, beady eyes that the witnesses described. And I knew at that point, we have the person that killed Brad Perry. He was familiar with the station where Brad worked, but he claimed that he's never been to that station. That's when I told him. We had a hit on his DNA on a bloody dollar bill that came from the crime scene. I said, how do you explain that?
His claim was that his blood must have got on a dollar bill because he was always cutting his hand at work, and then it would have passed in the stream of commerce to the gas station.
And at that point, he stopped talking.
We knew the case was going to be difficult to prosecute as it was because it's 30 years old. And so we needed evidence that was beyond a reasonable doubt.
We did have what Griffin's buddy Wade Mon told us about what happened that night, but he feared Glenn.
Even though Wade Mon was granted immunity, he nevertheless refused to testify. At this point, we know we have substantial evidentiary problems. We need to look at what do we have that could help us place Mr. Griffin at the gas station.
We still had the hairs that were found around the crime scene.
As we're proceeding to trial, the opportunity came up to have the mitochondrial DNA tested, which was a brand new technology, had never been used in a Utah court, and we were able to compare the hairs with Mr. Griffin's DNA.
And we have a DNA match.
That, to me, made an absolutely ironclad, unanswerable case. He might be able to explain why his blood was on the dollar bill. He might have been able to explain why his hairs were in that store. He certainly could not explain both of them at the same time, together with the drawing, in a way that was anything other than he, in fact, murdered Brad Perry. Mr. Griffin's friend, Wade Mon, was tried and the jury found him not guilty. That was a grave disappointment to me, but I respect the jury's role in this case.
Despite the acquittal of Wade Mon, the conviction of Glenn Griffin gives the Perry family some closure and helps heal a wound left open for 24 years.
I was satisfied that this was solved. I'm convinced that Brad was with me on this journey, and he wanted me to find some peace for his family.
What has helped me probably the most is the gospel, is the church I belong to. I feel that Brad's fine. He's just on to another sphere. And I feel like I'll see him again.
Because of Brad and because of his death, I think it led me to where I'm at and allowed me to do the things I've been able to do. I became a law enforcement officer to protect good law-abiding citizens from being hurt from people who are doing bad things. And that's what I do every day when I go out and do my job. Try to find the Glenn Griffins of the world.
In the late 1970s and early 1980, the rural community of Wylie, Texas, existed as a quiet haven of flat prairie land, sunlit pastures, and modest residential streets situated 30 miles northeast of Dallas. The town occupied a unique position between traditional agricultural roots and the emerging suburban landscape of North Texas, where pastoral cattle farms coexisted alongside newly constructed brick ranch houses. For generations, families who settled in Collin County lived by simple, enduring principles centered around hard labor, familial loyalty, and quiet Christian fellowship. The surrounding landscape was characterized by expansive skies, dusty roads lined with barbed wire fences, and a warm climate that slowed the pace of life during the long summer months, fostering an environment where neighbors knew each other intimately and community bonds were deeply cherished by all who called this territory home. As the Dallas metropolitan area expanded rapidly due to the growth of technology, telecommunications, and defense corporations, Wylie began attracting young, ambitious professionals who sought a peaceful environment away from the noise and complexity of city living. These newcomers were predominantly middle-class families with young children, drawn by affordable land, reputable public schools, and the idyllic promise of a wholesome suburban existence. They built spacious single-story homes with tidy lawns, planted saplings along newly paved residential lanes, and quickly integrated into the established rhythm of the town. Despite the steady influx of new residents, Wylie maintained its small-town ethos, where commercial activities remained modest. Local gossip traveled swiftly across backyard fences, and residents routinely left their front doors unlocked without fear. The prevailing atmosphere was one of profound safety, predictability, and shared moral expectations that governed everything. In a community where civic infrastructure was simple and commercial entertainment was virtually non-existent, social life revolved almost exclusively around local churches. The churches of Collin County served not merely as houses of worship on Sunday mornings, but as the primary cultural and recreational hubs for entire families throughout the week. Among these religious institutions, the First United Methodist Church of Lucas, located just a short drive beyond the municipal borders of Wylie, became a focal gathering point for many young couples striving to build meaningful connections. The church grounds, surrounded by open fields and towering Texas oak trees, hosted a continuous rotation of choir rehearsals, Bible study groups, charity drives, potluck suppers, and youth programs. Within this welcoming spiritual community, members formed lifelong friendships, shared their domestic triumphs, and created an interconnected support system that defined their social existence. It was within this active congregation that Candace Montgomery, known to everyone simply as Candy, blossomed as one of the most prominent, energetic, and beloved figures in the community. At 30 years old, Candy possessed an effervescent charm, an infectious laugh, and an extraordinary capacity for organizing social functions. With her wavy blonde hair, wide expressive smile, and vibrant personality, she commanded attention in any room she entered, radiating warmth and approachable optimism. Candy threw herself into church life with boundless enthusiasm, directing the children choir, teaching Sunday school, serving on administrative committees, and coordinating holiday celebrations with meticulous care. To all who observed her, Candy represented the ideal suburban homemaker, a creative and capable woman who seemed genuinely fulfilled by her domestic responsibilities, her active community involvement, and the countless friendships she effortlessly nurtured throughout the entire surrounding neighborhood. Candy was married to Pat Montgomery, a brilliant and highly respected electrical engineer employed at Texas Instruments, one of the premier technology companies driving the regional economic boom. Pat was a quiet, analytical, and gentle man whose introverted nature stood in stark contrast to the boisterous and outgoing temperament of his wife. He spent his working hours developing advanced military radar systems and cutting-edge electronic components, earning a lucrative salary that comfortably secured their middle-class lifestyle. At home, Pat was an attentive, patient father to their 2 young children and a devoted, reliable husband who took immense pride in providing his family with financial security and a comfortable home. Although Pat was content with a calm, routine existence centered around his technical work and domestic peace, his understated emotional nature often created an unspoken distance within their marriage. Beneath the polished surface of her seemingly perfect suburban life, Candy harbored an intense, growing sense of personal frustration and emotional emptiness. She loved her children and appreciated the comfortable stability her husband provided. Yet the relentless monotony of domestic chores, meal preparations, and routine social obligations left her feeling unfulfilled and invisible. She yearned for passion, excitement, and a sense of identity that transcended the conventional roles of devoted wife and dutiful mother. Candy attempted to channel her restless energy into various creative pursuits, including macrame, interior decorating, local theater, and organizing sports activities. But these pastimes failed to alleviate the profound boredom gnawing at her spirit. She felt trapped in an endless cycle of domestic predictability, wondering whether the vibrant, passionate woman inside her was destined to fade away beneath the suffocating expectations of suburban Texas female life. During this same period, another young family became an integral part of the Lucas Methodist congregation, sharing a parallel trajectory that would soon intertwine their destinies. Betty Gore was a 30-year-old elementary school teacher who had moved to Texas from a modest, traditional farming community in Kansas. Betty was a tall, slender woman with a quiet, dignified demeanor, serious eyes, and a sensitive, introspective nature. Dedicated to her profession, she poured her energy into educating young children, earning the respect of colleagues and parents for her patience and gentle guidance in the classroom. However, outside the structured environment of her school, Betty struggled profoundly with chronic social anxiety, self-consciousness, and an overwhelming fear of rejection, which made it difficult for her to form effortless, casual friendships in the gregarious church community across this entire small Texas town. Betty was married to Alan Gore, an engineer working at Rockwell International, another major corporation situated within the expanding technological corridor of northern Texas. Alan was a soft-spoken, unassuming man with wire-rimmed spectacles, thinning hair, and a practical, methodical approach to everyday problems. He was a conscientious worker, a loyal provider, and a gentle father to their young daughter, Elisa. Despite his steadfast devotion to his family, Alan frequently found himself emotionally drained by the complex psychological challenges within their household. Betty suffered from severe bouts of loneliness, postpartum depression, and acute separation anxiety, which intensified whenever Alan traveled out of town on corporate assignments. Betty constantly sought reassurance of his love and fidelity, creating an undercurrent of tension and emotional exhaustion that Alan struggled to navigate within the quiet confines of their private suburban family home life. The initial bond between the Montgomery and Gore families formed naturally through the shared activities and family-oriented programs organized by the Lucas Methodist Church. Their young daughters were close in age and quickly became inseparable playmates, spending long afternoons riding bicycles together, playing with dolls, and organizing elaborate games in each other's living rooms and backyards. This innocent childhood friendship brought the two mothers into frequent contact, establishing a regular rhythm of carpooling, shared school pickups, and reciprocal babysitting arrangements. Candy, with her natural inclination toward leadership and hospitality, often took the initiative to welcome the more reserved Betty into social circles, offering practical support and companionship to help ease the young teacher pervasive feelings of isolation and domestic distress in an unfamiliar town where she desperately sought acceptance and enduring community warmth among her new suburban Texas neighbors. The connection deepened substantially through the church adult co-ed volleyball league, which met weekly on the dusty outdoor court behind the chapel and inside local gymnasium facilities. In the informal, lively atmosphere of these athletic evenings, the rigid social constraints of small-town domestic life temporarily dissolved in favor of friendly competition and physical exertion. Candy was the undisputed spark plug of the games, diving aggressively across the court, cheering enthusiastically for every point, and filling the humid evening air with her unrestrained laughter. Alan Gore was also a regular participant in these weekly matches, finding in the physical activity a welcome release from the intellectual strains of his engineering desk and the heavy domestic pressures awaiting him at home. On the court, their interactions were casual, joyful, and completely innocent of any outward suspicion from those watching them play. The fateful morning of Friday, June 13, 1980, began with a deceptive and quiet stillness that offered absolutely no ominous warning of the catastrophic tragedy about to unfold in the peaceful residential neighborhood of Wylie, Texas. The morning sun rose brightly over the flat, sun-baked landscape, casting long golden beams across the dew-kissed lawns and quiet suburban streets, where local families were beginning to prepare for the lazy, unstructured days of early summer vacation. Alan Gore woke up early, moving through his routine with a quiet focus before preparing to embark on an out-of-town business trip to Minnesota, an employment obligation that would require him to spend multiple days away from his young family in the bustling corporate offices of his company. Before departing, he exchanged polite, mundane goodbyes with his wife Betty, who was managing the household chores while balancing the daily demands of caring for their infant daughter Bethany and their older daughter Elisa, who was eagerly packing her small bags for an upcoming church-sponsored summer camp adventure. There was no intense argument, no dramatic farewell, and no outward indication of lingering marital discord as Alan packed his suitcase, kissed his wife and children goodbye, and drove away from the house, completely unaware that this ordinary morning departure would be his final living interaction with the woman he had promised to cherish for the rest of his life. In the midst of these morning routines, Candy Montgomery was busy organizing her own household, tending to her children, and preparing for a day that initially appeared no different from the dozens of quiet suburban days that had preceded it. However, Candy had a specific logistical errand to run that directly involved the Gore household, stemming from a thoughtful arrangement made days earlier regarding Elisa Gore church camp packing list. Elisa was scheduled to leave for a multi-day vacation with the Lucas Methodist Youth Group, and she had accidentally left her favorite swimsuit behind at the Montgomery family home following a previous overnight playdate. Instead of simply waiting for a more convenient time to return the item, Candy generously volunteered to drive over to the Gore residence during the morning hours to drop off the swimsuit directly, ensuring that the young girl would not be missing an essential piece of clothing for her exciting summer adventure. This seemingly innocent, helpful gesture provided Candy with a completely logical and entirely unsuspicious reason to enter the Gore household while Alan was away, perfectly aligning with the routine neighborly kindness that had always characterized her public interactions within the tight-knit religious community. As Candy drove her station wagon through the quiet residential streets of Wylie and parked in the gravel driveway of the Gore residence, the neighborhood was wrapped in an atmosphere of utter tranquility, with children at local schools and most working adults fully engrossed in their daily professional routines. She stepped out of her vehicle carrying the swimsuit, walked confidently up to the front door, and let herself inside the cool, air-conditioned interior of the house, operating with the complete familiarity of someone who belonged there. At first, the interior was quiet, populated only by the soft, murmuring sounds of the infant baby resting in her crib and the usual domestic background noises of a well-kept suburban home. Betty Gore was surprised by Candy's sudden arrival, but she greeted her guest with the polite, reserved hospitality that typically marked their interactions, offering no resistance as Candy handed over the swimsuit and engaged in the brief, pleasant small talk that naturally accompanied such everyday neighborhood drop-offs. For a few brief moments, the atmosphere remained entirely ordinary, mirroring the countless other casual visits the two women had shared over the years as fellow mothers, choir members, and trusted friends in the surrounding community. However, the fragile veneer of polite neighborly interaction shattered instantly when the conversation abruptly shifted from mundane camp logistics to the heavy, toxic secret that had been silently poisoning the foundations of their lives for over a year. According to Candy later accounts, it was Betty who suddenly broke the quiet stillness of the morning air, confronting her guest with a direct, piercing question that exposed the lingering, agonizing suspicion she had harbored deep within her soul for many months. Betty looked squarely at Candy and asked the terrifying question that had haunted her sleepless nights: whether Candy had engaged in an illicit sexual affair with Alan while he was working away from home. Caught completely off guard by the sudden directness of the accusation, and realizing the absolute futility of continuing to maintain the elaborate web of deceit in the face of Betty's relentless intuition, Candy made the fateful decision to confess the truth. In that single, electrifying moment, the invisible dam of hidden resentment, suppressed guilt, and lingering betrayal burst wide open, permanently transforming the quiet residential kitchen into an arena of intense, volatile emotional confrontation. The confession struck Betty with the force of a physical blow, validating her absolute worst fears and turning her long-standing, agonizing suspicions into undeniable, devastating reality. The profound betrayal by someone she had welcomed into her home, trusted with her children, and confided in during her darkest moments of postpartum depression triggered an overwhelming, instantaneous surge of emotional fury and deep psychological pain that completely overwhelmed her delicate mental state. According to Candy's subsequent testimony regarding the sequence of events, Betty did not burst into tears or collapse in quiet despair. Instead, she reacted with a sudden, chilling burst of aggressive physical action, turning abruptly away from the kitchen area and walking swiftly into the utility room where the family washing machine, dryer, and household cleaning supplies were located. When Candy followed her in an attempt to offer explanations or calm her down, Betty reached behind the washing machine or into a nearby storage space and pulled out a heavy, long-handled wood-splitting axe that the family kept indoors for practical utility purposes. Gripping the heavy weapon tightly in her hands with a terrifying intensity, Betty turned to face Candy, her eyes wide with a mixture of raw grief, blind rage, and absolute desperation. With a voice cold, trembling, and charged with pure venom, Betty issued a stark, menacing warning that signaled the complete dissolution of their former friendship and any remaining shred of civilized restraint. "Do not touch me." Candy later recounted that she froze in absolute terror for a fraction of a second, staring at the gleaming metal blade of the heavy axe and realizing with sudden, bone-chilling clarity that her life was in immediate, mortal danger. She instinctively recognized that Betty's grief-stricken rage had pushed her far beyond the boundaries of rational thought, transforming the quiet elementary school teacher into a desperate, violent adversary intent on exacting ultimate retribution for the destruction of her family. In that split second of existential terror, the quiet suburban utility room ceased to be a domestic space and instantly became a battleground where two women would fight desperately for survival against the overwhelming weight of a year-long deception that had finally reached its catastrophic, bloody boiling point. Within the vast and complex annals of American criminal jurisprudence, few legal strategies have ever sparked as much intense debate, academic scrutiny, and public disbelief as the psychological explanation introduced during the defense of Candace Montgomery regarding a single, fleeting auditory trigger that allegedly occurred in the midst of a brutal mortal struggle. As investigators, legal experts, and curious observers across the nation attempted to make sense of how an otherwise well-respected community member and devout churchgoer could commit an act of such staggering violence inside a quiet suburban home, the defense team uncovered a deeply hidden psychological mechanism that would form the ultimate cornerstone of their courtroom strategy. This crucial element centered entirely upon a specific sound, a quiet vocalization made by the victim during the initial moments of their physical confrontation, which defense attorneys argued served as a catastrophic psychological catalyst capable of shattering normal cognitive control and plunging the accused into an involuntary state of dissociative panic. According to the detailed testimony provided by Candy during the trial proceedings, as the two women grappled fiercely for control of the heavy wood-splitting axe inside the confined space of the utility room, Betty Gore uttered a soft, silencing sound, a distinct hush or whisper meant to quiet her opponent. To anyone else, such a sound would have registered as nothing more than a routine, insignificant component of a stressful argument. But to Candy, those specific phonetic frequencies acted like an immediate key unlocking a dark, heavily guarded vault of long-suppressed childhood trauma. The sound instantly transported her mind backward through decades of personal history, dragging to the surface terrifying, buried memories of early abuse, severe parental control, and intense emotional terror from her formative years. This bizarre and unprecedented defense argument immediately polarized courtroom spectators, setting the stage for a fierce intellectual battle that would test the boundaries of psychiatric science and legal responsibility before a deeply skeptical public audience throughout the entire region and beyond now. To fully understand the profound gravity and psychological weight of this specific courtroom argument, one has to delve deeply into the hidden, troubled aspects of Candy's childhood that had remained entirely concealed behind her adult facade of cheerful suburban perfection. Growing up under the strict, authoritarian roof of her mother, Candy had experienced a childhood defined by rigid emotional suppression, excessive expectations, and severe disciplinary measures that frequently cross the boundary into psychological and physical abuse. Whenever young Candy attempted to express anger, voice disobedience, or step outside the narrow behavioral boundaries established by her parents, her mother would enforce absolute compliance through a chilling combination of harsh corporal punishment and a specific verbal command demanding total silence, often punctuated by that exact same silencing sound. This repetitive conditioning carved itself deeply into the neurological pathways of her developing brain, creating an automatic, deeply ingrained trauma response where the command for silence became indelibly linked with feelings of absolute helplessness, mortal terror, and inescapable danger. For many years, as Candy grew into adulthood, married a successful engineer, raised children, and immersed herself in the demanding social routines of the Lucas Methodist Church, those painful childhood memories remained firmly locked away behind a resilient mental wall of repression and normalization. She successfully constructed a sparkling, radiant persona characterized by endless optimism, energetic community leadership, and flawless domestic poise, completely masking the fragile psychological architecture supporting her everyday existence. Yet, the deep internal wounds had never truly healed. They merely lay dormant in the deep recesses of her subconscious mind, waiting quietly for a powerful enough environmental trigger to break through the carefully constructed barriers of her adult psyche and unleash the raw, unmitigated terror of her past upon the present reality, creating a ticking psychological time bomb within an otherwise peaceful and orderly suburban environment that nobody could have ever expected to experience such catastrophic violence during their ordinary daily lives in this quiet corner of Texas society, where everyone trusted their neighbors completely without any hidden fear or suspicion whatsoever on any given summer morning throughout the entire community landscape. That catastrophic trigger finally arrived on the morning of June 13th inside the blood-soaked utility room, when the stress of an exposed illicit affair collided with the raw fury of a betrayed wife holding a heavy axe. When Betty uttered that specific silencing sound during their violent struggle, it bypassed all rational thought processes and struck directly at the core of Candy's deepest childhood wounds, instantly dismantling her adult ego and plunging her into an acute state of dissociative panic. According to the expert testimony introduced by the defense, dissociation is a severe psychological defense mechanism wherein the mind completely detaches itself from immediate reality, allowing an individual to function on autopilot while experiencing a total blackout of conscious awareness and cognitive control. The psychiatrists and mental health professionals hired by the defense argued that at the exact moment the sound was uttered, Candy's psychological state fractured completely, transforming her into a frightened, helpless child trapped once again in the abusive environment of her youth, desperately fighting for survival against an overwhelming parental figure. In this terrifying dissociative state, she lost all capacity for rational decision-making, moral judgment, or proportional self-defense, engaging instead in a frantic, automated whirlwind of physical aggression driven entirely by primal survival instincts. The defense presented this psychological framework not as a convenient excuse to escape accountability, but as a genuine, medically documented phenomenon capable of explaining the staggering disconnect between Candy's outwardly gentle character and the overwhelming brutality of the 41 axe blows recorded by forensic pathologists at the crime scene. This intricate psychiatric defense forced the jury to confront complex questions about human consciousness, trauma, and the extent to which an individual can be held fully responsible for actions committed during an involuntary mental breakdown while facing mortal danger inside a confined space, where no other witnesses were present to verify the precise sequence of events that ultimately led to such a tragic and devastating outcome for everyone involved in this profoundly shocking historical criminal case in the state of Texas during that fateful summer season back in 1980 without any hesitation whatsoever. Naturally, this revolutionary and deeply controversial defense strategy provoked fierce outrage, immediate skepticism, and intense condemnation from both the prosecution and the broader public, who followed the sensational trial with bated breath. The district attorney and the prosecution team aggressively ridiculed the notion that a childhood memory triggered by a simple silencing sound could completely absolve someone of responsibility for inflicting dozens of savage blows upon another human being. They argued passionately before the jury that accepting such an absurd psychological theory would create a dangerous legal precedent, effectively allowing anyone accused of a violent crime to invent convenient mental blackouts and childhood trauma narratives to escape the full legal consequences of their actions. Prosecutors emphasized that the sheer volume of trauma, the physical persistence required to deliver 41 separate impacts, and the calculated calmness of Candy's behavior immediately following the incident completely contradicted the portrait of a helpless, dissociative victim acting in an involuntary trance. They pointed out that a person experiencing a true psychological blackout would not possess the presence of mind to clean up blood, change clothes, calmly pick up children from school, and maintain an elaborate facade of normalcy throughout the remainder of the day without showing a single outward sign of psychological distress or confusion. This glaring contradiction between the clinical dissociation theory and the cold, deliberate post-crime actions became the primary weapon for the prosecution as they sought to convince the jury that Candy was a calculated, cold-blooded killer who deliberately fabricated a psychological defense to manipulate the judicial system, deceive the members of the jury, and evade a well-deserved murder conviction that would bring justice to the grieving family members left behind to suffer the unimaginable pain of losing their beloved mother under such horrific circumstances during that unforgettable autumn trial that transfixed the entire nation and cemented this bizarre legal battle into the dark annals of American criminal history forevermore, without ever offering any easy answers to the lingering questions surrounding the true nature of human violence and emotional trauma within modern society, leaving permanent questions across the entire nation even today. Following the terrifying climax of the brutal, violent struggle that had just irrevocably shattered the peaceful morning quiet of that fateful June day, an eerie, heavy, and suffocating silence descended abruptly upon the small residential property situated right in the heart of Wiley. Inside the cramped utility room, which was now completely saturated with the heavy metallic scent of blood and marked by the gruesome visual evidence of a frenzied nightmare, the frantic energy of survival slowly gave way to a cold, calculated sense of necessity. Standing amidst the chaotic wreckage, Candy Montgomery realized with stark clarity that she needed to escape the scene immediately before anyone else arrived, and she began to execute a series of deliberate, chillingly methodical actions designed to erase her presence and protect her carefully guarded suburban life from total destruction. Her survival instincts, which had driven the physical conflict moments earlier, now transformed into a frighteningly focused pragmatism, compelling her to take immediate control of the situation and systematically clean away the physical evidence of the horrific tragedy that had just transpired behind closed doors. She moved quickly yet deliberately away from the lifeless body, leaving the blood-soaked utility room and stepping into the cooler, quieter areas of the home where she could begin the process of washing away the physical traces of the assault from her own body and clothing. Entering the master bathroom, she discarded her bloodied garments into a discreet location and stepped beneath the warm spray of the shower, scrubbing her skin with intense concentration to remove every microscopic trace of biological evidence, dirt, and lingering debris from the harrowing physical altercation. The rushing water washed away the visible stains of the terrible ordeal, while her mind maintained an astonishing, almost unnatural level of emotional compartmentalization, effectively suppressing the overwhelming horror of the past few minutes beneath a thick wall of clinical detachment. Once she was thoroughly cleansed, she dressed herself in fresh clothes she had brought along or found within the home, ensuring that her appearance was once again neat, orderly, and completely unremarkable before she prepared to step back out into the bright, sunlit world of suburban Texas. She carefully gathered her personal items, secured the blood-stained clothing into a hidden container or bag to be discarded safely during her upcoming travels away from the immediate neighborhood, and double-checked her appearance in the mirror to confirm that no lingering sign of distress or violence could possibly betray her secret to anyone she might encounter. Stepping out of the front door of the Gore residence, she locked it behind her with practiced casualness, walked calmly down the driveway, and climbed into her station wagon, taking a deep, steadying breath as she prepared to execute the most bizarre and psychologically chilling phase of her entire harrowing day. Her immediate objective was to resume her normal daily schedule without a single deviation, maintaining the flawless facade of an ordinary suburban homemaker and community volunteer to ensure that no one would ever suspect she had just spent her morning fighting for her life in a blood-drenched utility room just a short distance away. Driving through the quiet, sunlit streets of Wiley with a terrifying composure that defied human comprehension, she successfully picked up her children and their young friends, offering warm smiles, cheerful greetings, and casual conversational remarks about the pleasant weather and upcoming activities, as if nothing extraordinary had ever occurred. She later attended various church and community functions, interacting with friends, neighbors, and fellow parishioners with her signature boundless energy, vibrant laughter, and approachable charm, effortlessly playing the role of the beloved, helpful community pillar she had always strived to be. Not a single person who crossed paths with her during those afternoon hours noticed the slightest tremor in her hands, the faintest shadow of anxiety in her expressive eyes, or any unusual hesitation in her voice, leaving everyone completely oblivious to the dark, monstrous secret she carried silently locked away behind her radiant public smile. This extraordinary ability to slip back into routine normalcy immediately following an act of such staggering violence remained one of the most profoundly disturbing and inexplicable aspects of the entire case, leaving criminal psychologists and investigators utterly baffled by the chilling depth of her emotional compartmentalization. While Candy was successfully projecting an image of absolute innocence and cheerful domesticity across various locations in the town, miles away in the corporate offices of Minnesota, Alan Gore was beginning to experience a mounting wave of uneasy panic as his repeated telephone calls to his home went persistently unanswered. Throughout the morning and early afternoon hours, Alan had dialed his home telephone number multiple times from his workplace, hoping to speak briefly with Betty or confirm that everything was proceeding according to plan regarding the children and the upcoming summer camp preparations. However, each attempt was met only by an empty, hollow ringing sound echoing through an apparently deserted house. With no one picking up the receiver to provide the reassurance he desperately craved amidst his demanding professional responsibilities. Initially, he rationalized the persistent silence by assuming that Betty might be busy with household chores, tending to the baby in the nursery, or temporarily stepping outside to run routine errands around the local neighborhood with their young daughters. Yet, as the afternoon hours wore on inexorably and the phone continued to ring endlessly into the void, a heavy sense of dread began to tighten painfully in his chest, amplifying his underlying anxieties and overriding his ability to concentrate on his work duties. Driven by an urgent, overwhelming premonition that something was fundamentally wrong with his family, he finally decided to take decisive action by contacting individuals living near his residence to request assistance in checking on the welfare of his wife and children. Alan placed an urgent telephone call to close neighbors residing on his quiet street, explaining his growing emotional concern with a palpable tremor in his voice and earnestly asking if one of them would be willing to walk over to his house to investigate the troubling situation and see why absolutely nobody was answering the telephone calls. The neighbors, who were deeply fond of the Gore family and always eager to help out a friend in need, readily agreed to assist and immediately set off toward the property to perform a thorough welfare check. Upon arriving at the house, they noticed that the exterior appeared entirely calm and undisturbed, with no obvious signs of a struggle or forced entry visible from the street, though the atmosphere surrounding the residence felt strangely quiet and oppressive. They walked up to the front entrance, knocked loudly on the door several times, and called out the names of the occupants, but the only response that greeted them was the faint, continuous sound of the baby crying incessantly from within the distant nursery room. Increasingly unsettled by the peculiar combination of an unresponsive household and a crying infant left unattended for hours, the neighbors made the decision to enter the home through an unlocked door, or by trying the handle to ensure that Betty had not suffered a sudden medical emergency or a fainting spell that prevented her from reaching the telephone. Stepping cautiously into the quiet hallway, they followed the sound of the infant cries toward the back of the house, noting the strange, heavy stillness that hung thick in the air like an invisible shroud over every room they passed. As they drew closer to the rear utility room area, a sudden, powerful wave of foul metallic odor struck their senses, immediately sending chills down their spines and alerting them to the terrifying presence of something deeply wrong within the domestic space. Pushing open the door to the utility room, they froze in sheer horror, their minds entirely unprepared to process the apocalyptic nightmare spread across the walls, floor, and appliances before their eyes. The lifeless body of Betty Gore lay sprawled in a massive, expanding pool of dark crimson blood that coated the entire floor and splattered every surface in a graphic testament to unimaginable violence. Overwhelmed by shock, profound terror, and the immediate realization that a horrific murder had taken place, the neighbors stumbled backward in absolute panic, escaping the gruesome scene as quickly as possible to contact emergency services immediately. Within minutes, police cruisers, detectives, and emergency medical personnel descended upon the quiet residential street with blaring sirens, sealing off the neighborhood, cordoning off the property, and turning the once peaceful suburban haven into a heavily guarded crime scene that would soon shock the entire nation with its grim revelations and profound sorrow. From the very earliest moments of the frantic criminal investigation that suddenly plunged the quiet, unassuming suburban community of Wiley into an unprecedented storm of shock, fear, and relentless media scrutiny, the seasoned detectives of the Collin County Sheriff Department found themselves facing a crime scene of extraordinary complexity, baffling brutality, and deeply unsettling mysteries. Initial investigative efforts were forced to cast a wide net, systematically exploring every conceivable hypothesis to explain the horrific violence that had ended Betty Gore's life in such a catastrophic manner. Investigators thoroughly considered the possibility of a botched daytime burglary carried out by an opportunistic criminal, a random assault perpetrated by an unknown transient roaming through the northern Texas region, or even a targeted act of vengeance executed by a shadowy outsider with a personal grudge against the family. However, a meticulous examination of the physical evidence quickly dismantled these external theories. As the home showed no signs of forced entry, valuable household items and cash remained completely untouched, and the nature of the attack itself revealed an intensely personal, emotional fury that pointed unmistakably toward someone within the victim's close personal circle. The brutal, intimate nature of the 41 axe blows strongly suggested that the perpetrator was an individual who knew Betty personally, understood the daily rhythms of the household, and had gained entry into the residence without triggering any immediate defensive alarm or suspicion from the homeowner. As police detectives began interviewing neighbors, friends, and local church members to map out a comprehensive timeline of the victim's final hours, the spotlight of suspicion rapidly and inevitably swung toward Candace Montgomery, the cheerful and energetic housewife who had been among the very last people known to interact with Betty on that fateful morning. The initial interactions between law enforcement and Candy maintained a polite, professional facade, but beneath the surface, investigators quickly began noticing subtle inconsistencies, evasive behavioral nuances, and troubling gaps in her detailed accounts of the morning visit. When questioned about her trip to the Gore residence to return Elisa's swimsuit, Candy calmly maintained that everything had been entirely normal, describing a brief, friendly conversation with Betty before she departed for her own home, completely denying any knowledge of subsequent events or the horrific tragedy that had unfolded shortly thereafter. Yet, as detectives dug deeper into the intricate social fabric of the community, uncovering long-standing secrets and whispers regarding the tight-knit religious circles, a massive piece of the puzzle violently snapped into place with explosive force. The clandestine affair between Candy and Alan Gore, which had been carefully hidden behind an elaborate wall of secrecy and rigid logistical rules for nearly a year before its purported termination, was suddenly exposed to the investigating authorities, completely altering the trajectory and primary focus of the entire criminal investigation. When Alan Gore was interrogated by detectives upon his frantic return from his business trip in Minnesota, he confessed the full truth about their past relationship, detailing the secret motel rendezvous, the strict behavioral protocols, and the subsequent end of the affair, which provided a massive, undeniable personal motive that completely shattered Candy's initial claims of complete innocence. Armed with this explosive new evidence, law enforcement officials realized that the morning interaction between the two women had been far from a routine, peaceful neighborly drop-off, transforming Candy instantly from a cooperative community witness into the primary murder suspect in one of the most shocking homicide cases in modern Texan history. Faced with the crushing weight of the newly uncovered affair, the mounting circumstantial evidence, and the relentless pressure applied by experienced interrogators determined to uncover the truth, Candy Montgomery finally realized that her elaborate facade of absolute innocence could no longer be sustained under the harsh glare of a criminal investigation. In a dramatic turning point at the police station, she abandoned her initial story and admitted to investigators that she had indeed been present in the utility room during the violent altercation, acknowledging that a severe physical and verbal confrontation had taken place between her and Betty on the morning of June 13th. However, rather than confessing to a calculated murder or a premeditated act of malice, Candy aggressively shifted the narrative to establish a framework of absolute self-defense, claiming with striking composure that Betty had been the initial aggressor who had attacked her with the wood-splitting axe after discovering the truth about the past affair. According to her detailed statements, Betty had confronted her with raw, unmitigated fury, retrieved the heavy weapon from the utility storage area, and issued a chilling warning before launching a fierce physical assault that forced Candy into a desperate, life-or-death struggle for her own survival. She asserted that she had managed to disarm her attacker only after a terrifying, chaotic physical tussle, and that the overwhelming number of subsequent blows had been struck during an involuntary, panic-induced psychological blackout where her mind completely fractured under the weight of acute terror. The police detectives, deeply skeptical of a self-defense claim involving 41 savage axe blows, viewed her narrative as a desperate, self-serving fabrication designed to escape the electric chair or a life sentence in prison, and they promptly placed her under formal arrest, charging her with murder and setting the stage for a sensational trial that would captivate the entire nation. The formal indictment and subsequent arrest of Candace Montgomery sent shockwaves rippling across the entire state of Texas and quickly attracted intense, unyielding national media attention that transformed the quiet suburban town of Wiley into the epicenter of a historic legal spectacle. Reporters, camera crews, and true crime enthusiasts flooded the local community, camping outside the courthouse and dissecting every minute detail of the impending trial, fascinated by the stark contradiction between Candy's polished, angelic public image as a devoted church volunteer and the monstrous brutality of the accusations she faced. While the prosecution team, led by district attorneys determined to secure a conviction, meticulously built a robust case centered on the sheer physical impossibility of 41 blows constituting legitimate self-defense, the defense, spearheaded by the charismatic attorney Don Crowder, prepared a revolutionary and deeply controversial strategy that would rely heavily on forensic psychiatry, childhood trauma, and the complex psychological concept of dissociative panic. The community of Wiley itself became deeply polarized, with friends, neighbors, and church parishioners split into opposing factions, some refusing to believe that such a warm and vibrant woman could ever commit an act of such staggering violence, while others demanded absolute justice for the grieving family of the victim who had been left to bear an unimaginable loss. As the autumn trial date rapidly approached, the entire region stood poised on the precipice of a monumental legal battle that promised to explore the darkest recesses of the human psyche, challenge traditional notions of guilt and innocence, and forever etch this harrowing chapter into the annals of American criminal jurisprudence as a timeless study in secrets, violence, and the fragile veneer of suburban peace. The highly anticipated criminal trial of Candace Montgomery commenced in the historic courtroom of Collin County during the crisp autumn month of October 1980, drawing an immense crowd of journalists, legal observers, and local residents who packed the public benches to capacity. The atmosphere inside the courthouse was thick with electric tension and palpable curiosity, as people from all walks of life gathered to witness the unfolding of a legal drama that had gripped the entire state of Texas and captured the collective imagination of the American public. Every single detail of the proceedings was scrutinized under the relentless glare of television cameras and national newspaper reporters, transforming the quiet municipal building into the center of a nationwide spectacle. Presiding over the historic case was a seasoned judge tasked with maintaining order amidst the overwhelming public fervor, while the legal teams on both sides prepared to present their opposing interpretations of the tragic events that had transpired inside the Gore household on that fateful summer morning. The prosecution team approached the trial with absolute confidence in the strength of their physical evidence, believing that the sheer brutality of the crime scene and the undeniable biological facts would easily secure a conviction for murder. On the other side of the aisle sat the defense team, led by the fiercely determined and ambitious attorney Don Crowder, who understood that conventional legal arguments would be entirely insufficient to overcome the overwhelming weight of the physical evidence against his client. Crowder had chosen a daring, highly unconventional path that would rely heavily on the emerging fields of forensic psychiatry and psychological trauma to reshape how the jury perceived the actions of the accused woman. From the opening statements onward, it was abundantly clear that this trial would not merely determine the guilt or innocence of an individual defendant, but would instead force the judicial system to grapple with deep, unsettling questions regarding human consciousness, emotional triggers, and the complex boundaries of self-defense under extreme psychological duress within modern society. The core foundation of the defense strategy constructed by Don Crowder rested upon two primary pillars designed to dismantle the state narrative step by step. First, the defense aggressively sought to establish that Betty Gore had been the initial aggressor in the fatal encounter, arguing that she was the one who retrieved the heavy wood-splitting axe from the utility room and initiated the physical assault after confronting Candy about her past affair with Alan. To support this narrative, Crowder relied entirely upon Candy detailed testimony regarding the sequence of events inside the enclosed space, emphasizing that her actions were born out of a desperate, primal need to protect her own life against a deeply enraged and heavily armed adversary. Second, and far more controversially, the defense introduced the complex psychiatric concept of dissociative panic to explain the overwhelming brutality of the subsequent physical struggle. Crowder argued that when Betty uttered that specific silencing sound during the heat of their desperate wrestling match for control of the weapon, it acted as a catastrophic psychological trigger that instantly transported Candy back to her severely abusive childhood, fracturing her conscious mind and plunging her into an involuntary state of automated self-preservation. To validate this revolutionary argument, the defense brought forward esteemed psychiatric experts who testified at length about the physiological mechanisms of trauma responses, severe dissociative states, and temporary cognitive blackouts under extreme stress. These experts painted a vivid picture of a woman whose conscious mind had completely shut down, leaving her physical body to operate on pure, unmitigated instinctual panic without any deliberate intent to kill. Through this sophisticated psychological lens, the defense attempted to reframe the horrifying reality of 41 axe blows not as a malicious act of cold-blooded vengeance, but as a tragic, involuntary physiological reaction of a deeply traumatized psyche pushed far beyond the absolute breaking limits of human endurance by an unexpected life-or-death confrontation inside a confined space where no external witnesses were present to contradict her narrative. In direct opposition to the intricate psychological theories presented by the defense, the prosecuting attorneys launched a relentless and aggressive assault on the credibility of the self-defense claim, anchoring their entire case to the undeniable, gruesome physical reality of the crime scene. The district attorneys relentlessly reminded the jury of a simple, unavoidable mathematical and logical truth that defined the entire prosecution argument. If the defendant was merely acting in legitimate self-defense to neutralize an immediate threat to her life, why did she inflict a staggering total of 41 separate axe blows upon the victim? With many of those devastating impacts occurring after Betty had already been rendered completely unconscious or entirely motionless on the floor. The state argued passionately that such an extreme level of continuous violence far exceeded any rational definition of lawful self-defense, pointing instead toward a deliberate, malice-driven explosion of rage and hatred that completely invalidated any claims of accidental or involuntary panic. Furthermore, the prosecution heavily emphasized Candy's calculated and chillingly composed behavior immediately following the termination of the struggle, pointing out to the jury that a genuinely traumatized person experiencing a total dissociative psychological blackout would not possess the presence of mind to meticulously clean away bloodstains, change into fresh clothing, calmly pick up children from school, and seamlessly reintegrate into normal community activities without showing the slightest outward sign of emotional distress, confusion, or lingering panic. They argued that these deliberate, calculated actions revealed a cold and calculating mind fully aware of its wrongdoing, striving desperately to cover up the devastating consequences of a brutal crime rather than an innocent victim reacting in a helpless trance. The prosecutors urged the members of the jury to look past the smoke and mirrors of expensive psychiatric testimony and focus instead on the undeniable physical evidence, warning that acquitting the defendant on the grounds of a convenient psychological blackout would send a dangerous message to society, effectively establishing a troubling precedent where anyone could brutally murder another human being and escape justice by simply inventing a convenient narrative of childhood trauma and temporary mental instability. The courtroom tension reached a fever pitch as both legal teams delivered their impassioned final arguments, leaving the fate of Candace Montgomery resting squarely in the hands of the 12 jurors selected for the trial. These citizens carried an immense burden, tasked with wading through conflicting medical testimonies, graphic forensic evidence, and polarizing community opinions to arrive at a verdict. They had to decide whether a beloved church volunteer could experience a profound psychiatric fracture transforming her into an automated agent of violence, or if she was a cunning killer who manufactured a defense to outsmart the judicial system. As the jury retired to deliberate, the state held its collective breath while reporters scrambled to update their networks on the monumental trial. Legal experts speculated wildly, predicting a deadlock or a manslaughter conviction given the sheer physical impossibility of 41 axe blows aligning with lawful self-defense. However, the deliberations were remarkably brief, lasting only a little over 3 hours before the jury signaled a unanimous decision regarding guilt or innocence. The courtroom filled to absolute suffocation as observers returned to their seats, knowing the upcoming announcement would permanently alter the legal landscape and answer a mystery that deeply tormented the local community for many long months of intense public speculation, anxiety, and profound sorrow. When the foreman finally stood up to read the official verdict of the court, a breathless and stunned silence fell instantly over the crowded room. The jury formally declared her not guilty of murder, fully accepting the revolutionary defense argument that the killing was an act of justifiable self-defense committed during a state of extreme psychological panic. Shocked gasps erupted across the public benches and media sections alike. For the grieving family of Betty Gore, the unexpected outcome felt like an unbearable second tragedy and an absolute miscarriage of justice that left them shattered. Candy broke down in uncontrollable tears of overwhelming relief, immediately embracing her defense attorneys. Reporters rushed out of the building to broadcast the astonishing news nationwide, sparking fierce debates that would rage for decades across legal circles. Shortly after the trial concluded, Candy and Pat quietly packed their belongings, left Texas entirely behind, and started a new life under an assumed name in a distant state, hoping to escape the lingering shadows of their troubled past. Yet, the chilling legacy of the Wiley Axe murder trial continues to haunt the American criminal consciousness, remaining an eternal, deeply divisive symbol of the dark depths that can lie hidden beneath the calm and ordinary suburban peace. Following the stunning and deeply controversial not guilty verdict delivered by the Collin County jury in October 1980, the landscape of the small Texas community of Wiley was irrevocably altered, leaving behind a pervasive atmosphere of profound shock, bitter division, and lingering disbelief. Candace Montgomery, having miraculously escaped a murder conviction through a revolutionary psychiatric defense, realized that remaining in the town where the tragedy occurred had become entirely untenable given the intense hostility, unforgiving public scrutiny, and deep animosity directed toward her by local residents who viewed the judicial outcome as a grave miscarriage of justice. Within a relatively short period following the conclusion of the trial, Candy and her husband Pat made the difficult decision to pack up their belongings, permanently sever their ties to the region, and leave the state of Texas entirely behind in search of a quiet anonymity where they could attempt to rebuild their fractured lives far away from the persistent media spotlight and the condemning whispers of the public. They relocated to a distant state, adopted a new surname to shield themselves from notoriety, and tried to integrate into a new community where their dark, turbulent past would remain hidden beneath a shroud of ordinary daily routines. However, the immense psychological strain and the heavy emotional baggage of the trial ultimately proved too burdensome for their marriage to endure over the long term, leading to a quiet separation and eventual divorce that dissolved the partnership which had survived the initial crisis of the affair and the murder trial, but could not ultimately withstand the slow-burning erosion of private trauma and unspoken resentment. Pat eventually moved forward with his life, choosing a path of professional stability and quiet seclusion, while Candy attempted to craft a conventional existence in her new surroundings, working ordinary jobs and striving to keep her identity concealed from the relentless curiosity of journalists who continued to track the echoes of the famous case across the decades, ensuring that complete peace remained perpetually out of reach even in their new geographical sanctuary far away from the initial epicenter of the tragedy that defined their personal histories. In stark contrast to the anonymity sought by the Montgomery family, the surviving members of the Gore household were left to navigate a lifelong landscape of unimaginable grief, permanent loss, and a crushing sense of judicial abandonment that could never be truly healed by the passage of time. Betty Gore parents and relatives, hailing from their traditional roots in Kansas, struggled immensely to comprehend how a brutal crime resulting in 41 savage axe blows could be legally justified as self-defense, leaving them to carry the agonizing burden of a profound injustice that shadowed their lives. The two young daughters of Betty and Alan, Elisa and Bethany, were forced to grow up without the guidance and care of a mother, shouldering the devastating emotional trauma of losing her under such horrific and publicly scrutinized circumstances during their most formative childhood and teenage years. Family members stepped forward to provide love, shelter, and stability, raising the young girls in a protective environment designed to shield them as much as possible from the sensationalized media coverage and public fascination that resurrected details of the tragedy. Alan Gore, burdened by his own heavy share of moral guilt, deep remorse, and the agonizing realization that his secret romantic indiscretion had directly catalyzed the chain of catastrophic events leading to his wife's death, eventually attempted to reconstruct a semblance of normality for his daughters, while quietly withdrawing from the intense public eye that had fixated on his private life during the height of the legal proceedings. Over the years, the Gore family chose a path of private dignity, largely refusing to participate in the endless commercial exploitation, sensational documentaries, and dramatized media adaptations that repeatedly dragged the painful details of the murder back into the glaring spotlight of public entertainment, preferring instead to honor Betty's memory through quiet remembrance and the private endurance of a grief that time could never fully erase or mitigate, keeping their dignity intact. As decades rolled by, the Wiley axe murder case gradually transcended its origins as a local Texas tragedy to become a true crime milestone in modern American history, cementing a permanent place in the annals of true crime lore. Investigative journalists, legal scholars, and forensic psychologists continued to dissect the trial transcripts, police reports, and psychiatric testimonies, transforming the bizarre narrative into a classic case study taught in law schools and criminal justice classrooms across the nation to illustrate legal and psychological complexities. The inherent contradiction between Candy's public image as a cheerful, community-minded homemaker and the horrific brutality of the 41 axe blows fascinated generations of observers, sparking debates exploring the human psyche and suburban pressures. This enduring cultural obsession eventually inspired numerous literary and cinematic adaptations, beginning with early true crime books written by investigative reporters who spent countless hours interviewing the key participants and unearthing the intricate details of the secret affair, the fateful morning confrontation, and the dramatic courtroom battles that followed. These written accounts laid the groundwork for future dramatizations, culminating in television projects that brought the story to millions through streaming series featuring acclaimed Hollywood actors who vividly recreated the tense atmosphere, psychological turmoil, and emotional volatility of the 1980 events. Through these visual adaptations, new generations of audiences were introduced to the haunting legacy of the case, ensuring that the names of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore would remain permanently etched into the cultural consciousness, serving as a perpetual reminder of how quickly the fragile veneer of suburban peace can shatter when hidden secrets, human weakness, and explosive violence collide in the quiet corners of everyday life across modern society. More than 4 decades have passed since that humid, fateful morning in June 1980, when the quiet residential streets of Wiley were shattered by an act of violence. Yet the fundamental questions raised by the case continue to divide public opinion and provoke intense philosophical debate without consensus. To this day, observers remain deeply polarized into 2 uncompromising camps, with one faction firmly convinced that Candy Montgomery acted in frantic, justifiable self-defense to protect her own life against an enraged adversary holding a lethal weapon, while the opposing faction remains equally certain that she was a ruthless, calculating killer who skillfully manipulated the judicial system and hid behind an elaborate psychiatric fabrication to escape the ultimate legal consequences of a brutal and premeditated murder. The enduring fascination with the case stems largely from the uncomfortable truth that it forces ordinary individuals to confront the terrifying possibility that anyone, regardless of how gentle, pious, or well-adjusted they appear on the surface, might possess a hidden breaking point where the civilized constraints of society give way to primal, uncontrollable violence when pushed past the absolute limits of emotional endurance and psychological stress. The legacy of the trial also highlights the profound power of narrative construction within the courtroom, demonstrating how forensic experts and charismatic defense attorneys can successfully reframe a horrific act of carnage into a sympathetic tale of survival and past trauma through the strategic deployment of modern psychiatric concepts before a sympathetic jury. As time moves forward and the physical participants fade quietly into the background of history, the story of the Wiley axe murder remains an immortal monument to the complex, unpredictable, and often unfathomable shadows that lurk quietly beneath the shining surface of human existence, ensuring that people will forever search for absolute answers within a labyrinth of secrets, deceit, and lingering doubt that will never be fully illuminated. The enduring cultural resonance of the Wiley axe murder case has grown exponentially over the decades, evolving from a shocking local tragedy into a defining pillar of American true crime lore that continues to captivate the public imagination. As the years progressed, the chilling narrative of suburban deception, an illicit affair, and a brutal morning confrontation transcended its initial regional notoriety to become a subject of intense fascination for investigative journalists, authors, and documentary filmmakers seeking to unravel the complex psychological layers underpinning the historic trial. Books published by dedicated reporters who spent countless hours analyzing trial transcripts, interviewing key participants, and exploring the intricate social dynamics of Collin County provided readers with exhaustive accounts of the events leading up to that fateful June morning. These literary explorations laid a solid foundation for a broader cultural obsession, ensuring that the tragedy would never fade into obscurity, but instead remain a prominent case study in the evolution of modern forensic psychology and criminal defense strategies. True crime enthusiasts and legal historians alike frequently revisit the details of the case, examining how a seemingly ordinary suburban community could harbor such intense emotional turmoil beneath its polished exterior. The psychological complexity of the defense strategy, particularly the introduction of dissociative panic triggered by an auditory cue, established a fascinating precedent that continues to spark vigorous debates in law schools and criminal justice seminars across the nation. Through these comprehensive retrospectives, the case transformed from a simple headline-grabbing murder into a complex sociological mirror reflecting the hidden pressures, marital disillusionments, and silent struggles that frequently accompanied the rapid expansion of American suburban life during the late 20th century. This sustained historical interest demonstrated a collective human compulsion to look beyond the comfortable facades of everyday life and investigate the fragile boundaries separating civilized societal behavior from the primal, uncontrollable depths of human emotion when individuals are pushed to the absolute breaking point of psychological endurance. The fascination with the Candy Montgomery case eventually crossed over from investigative journalism and academic study into the realm of mainstream entertainment, culminating in major television and cinematic adaptations that brought the harrowing story to millions of viewers worldwide. Hollywood producers and streaming networks recognized the immense dramatic potential inherent in the stark contrasts of the narrative, where angelic church volunteers, clandestine motel rendezvous, and a gruesome suburban murder created a recipe for compelling psychological drama. Major productions released in recent years, including high-profile television limited series featuring acclaimed actors, meticulously recreated the atmosphere, fashion, and social tensions of 1980 suburban Texas, introducing the complex historical case to an entirely new generation of global audiences. These dramatic adaptations successfully humanized the individuals involved while simultaneously heightening the suspense and emotional turbulence of the events, prompting widespread public discussions about domestic expectations, female autonomy, marital infidelity, and the often precarious nature of justice within the American legal system. Viewers across the globe found themselves gripped by the tension of the courtroom battles, the psychological breakdowns described by expert witnesses, and the shocking final verdict that had stunned the original Texas jury decades prior. By translating the grim reality of the case into prestige television, these projects reignited public debates regarding guilt, innocence, and moral accountability, proving that the lingering questions surrounding the tragedy had lost none of their provocative power over the passage of time. The cinematic retellings also served to permanently cement the names of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore in popular culture, ensuring that their intertwined fates would remain a perpetual reference point whenever discussions turned to the dark undercurrents lurking quietly beneath the bright, sunlit surfaces of modern suburban existence. Beyond its entertainment value and legal significance, the case has left a profound and lasting psychological imprint on the collective consciousness of American society, serving as a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of unaddressed emotional distress and hidden deceit. Mental health professionals and forensic specialists frequently reference the trial when discussing the profound impact of childhood trauma, repressed memories, and severe dissociative states on human behavior under extreme stress, using the narrative to illustrate how deep-seated psychological wounds can manifest in sudden, catastrophic outbursts of violence. The tragedy highlights the critical importance of open communication, emotional honesty, and professional mental health support within marriages and communities, warning against the dangers of maintaining superficial appearances of perfection at the expense of genuine emotional well-being. For the residents of Wylie and the broader Texan community, the case remains an indelible scar on local history, a reminder of a peaceful morning forever shattered by an explosion of unimaginable fury that changed the trajectory of numerous lives in an instant. Even as new families move into the region and the physical landscape evolves with modern suburban development, the whispers of the past continue to linger around the edges of the town, reminding those who delve into local history of the dark secrets that once rested behind closed doors. The legacy of the trial endures not merely as a sensational piece of true crime history, but as a complex, multifaceted human drama that forces observers to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the fallibility of memory, and the immense difficulty of truly knowing what happens behind the closed doors of our neighbors' homes when the rest of the world is looking away in absolute ignorance. As modern society continues to grapple with the complexities of human psychology, legal responsibility, and the relentless evolution of true crime media, the story of Candace Montgomery and Betty Gore retains its powerful grip on the public psyche, ensuring that the debate over what truly transpired in that utility room will never truly be settled. The lack of absolute closure, compounded by conflicting testimonies, graphic forensic evidence, and a controversial judicial outcome, guarantees that future generations of investigators, legal scholars, and curious minds will continue to analyze every available detail in search of definitive answers that may simply no longer exist. Whether viewed as an extraordinary instance of justifiable self-defense executed by a deeply traumatized woman, or as a chilling miscarriage of justice engineered by a manipulative killer who successfully fooled a jury, the tragedy stands as an immortal monument to the intricate shadows that dwell within the human heart. Ultimately, the case serves as a timeless reminder that human beings are remarkably complex creatures capable of projecting profound warmth, kindness, and societal grace while simultaneously harboring hidden storms of frustration, fear, and desperation. The legacy of that humid June morning in 1980 will forever echo through the corridors of criminal jurisprudence and cultural history, challenging everyone who encounters the narrative to look deeper, think more critically about the fragile structures of everyday life, and acknowledge the profound mysteries that continue to define the shared human experience across the modern world.